Do you ever feel like you're just a number? When you read the news about inflation rates, GDP growth, or interest rate adjustments, do you feel a cold detachment? These terms govern your life. They determine the value of your savings, the likelihood of your layoff, or whether you can afford a home. Yet they are spoken by distant, powerful people in wood-paneled rooms as if they're discussing the weather and not the livelihoods of millions. You are not imagining it. This feeling of being managed by an invisible, impersonal system is perfectly real, and if we had to pinpoint the exact moment the dream of turning human society into a giant dashboard was born, it was 1969. That year, for the first time, the Sveriges Riksbank Prize in Economic Sciences in memory of Alfred Nobel was awarded, and it wasn't given to a great philosopher of freedom or inequality. It was given to two men, Jan Tinbergen and Ragnar Frisch, for having developed and applied dynamic models for the analysis of economic processes. It's a dull sentence, isn't it? But don't let the dryness fool you. Hidden within it is the most radical and frightening idea of modern history, that the economy is not a story of human behavior, but a machine. And if it's a machine, it can be controlled by engineers. Frisch and Tinbergen were not economists in the traditional sense. They were physicists, mathematicians. They looked at the chaos of the Great Depression, the suffering, the despair, the millions jobless, and they didn't see human tragedy. They saw an engineering problem to be solved. They believed that if they could just gather enough data on your spending, your loans, your fears, they could write the equations that govern it all. They invented econometrics. They were the first to build massive mathematical models of entire nations. This was a powerful idea. It promised a world without depressions, a world without mass unemployment, a world where experts could steer the ship of state with precision, avoiding every iceberg. It was a promise of order from chaos. And who wouldn't want that? That promise changed the world. It gave economists a power that philosophers and kings never had. They became the technocrats, the high priests of a new religion called data. But there is a sharp, nagging question this first prize posed, one that still haunts us today. What happens if we are not cogs in their machine? What happens if human beings, in all their irrationality, their panic, their greed, and their love, cannot be reduced to equations? And more terrifyingly, what happens when the engineers come to believe that their model is more important than your reality? The story of Tinbergen and Frisch is not ancient history. It is the prologue to the world you live in right now. A world obsessed with algorithms, where your future is decided by predictive models you are never allowed to see. They were the original architects of the fate machine, and we are all still living inside it.
To understand why the first prize went to the engineers, you must understand the world they emerged from. It was not our world of inconveniences and short-lived shocks. It was a world of total collapse. Imagine waking up one morning and all the rules have changed. Before the 1930s, the dominant economic science was a romantic one. Laissez-faire, the free market. Leave it alone and it will heal itself. If there is a crisis, it is a necessary cleansing fever to weed out the weak. Government interference only makes it worse. It was a beautiful, orderly idea until it wasn't. In 1929, the Great Depression hit. It was not a fever, it was a plague. The market did not self-correct. It dove straight to the bottom and lay there, dead. Millions lost their jobs. Banks failed. Ordinary men and women who had done everything right found themselves destitute, standing in soup lines. Capitalism as an idea had seemingly failed. This chaos created a terrifying vacuum, and into that vacuum two forces rose. One was John Maynard Keynes. Keynes, a brilliant and arrogant British economist, made a heretical claim: laissez-faire was dead. He argued the market was not driven by rational equations. It was driven by animal spirits, an invisible tide of optimism or pessimism. And when pessimism takes over, as it did in the Depression, the machine stops. The only way to restart it? The government must step in and become the spender of last resort. Keynes provided the why for intervention, but he was an artist, not a scientist. When asked exactly how much the government should spend or when it should stop, his theories grew vague. This was the stage set for our heroes. Ragnar Frisch, a Norwegian of almost religious intensity and passion, looked at this chaos with the horror of a moralist. He believed the human suffering of the Depression was a technical failure. He believed economics had to be dragged out of the shadows of philosophy and into the cold, clear light of science. It was Frisch who named everything. In 1933, he coined the term econometrics. He also split the field into microeconomics, the behavior of you and me, and macroeconomics, the behavior of the whole machine. He wasn't just an economist, he was an architect trying to draw the blueprints for a new cathedral.
If Frisch was the architect, Jan Tinbergen was the master engineer. Tinbergen, trained as a physicist, was the embodiment of practicality. He didn't just talk about models, he built them. In 1936, he did the unthinkable. He built the world's first macroeconometric model for the Dutch economy. It was a set of 24 equations designed to simulate the entire nation, how consumption led to investment, how exports affected employment. It was a crude, revolutionary attempt. For the first time, a government could see its economy, not as a chaotic mob, but as a mechanical schematic. Their work wasn't born in an ivory tower. It was forged in fire. After World War II ravaged Europe, the need was not to speculate about the economy. The need was to rebuild. Governments everywhere were desperate for a tool. They needed to know, if we build 10,000 houses, how many jobs will it create? How will it affect inflation? And Tinbergen and Frisch were there, handing them what they craved, an instruction manual. When the Swedish Riksbank created the Economics Prize in 1968, choosing them as the first recipients in 1969 was a profoundly political and philosophical statement. It was an announcement that the age of philosophers was over. The age of engineers had begun. The prize legitimized a worldview. It validated their dream that society could be managed, that human chaos could be tamed by mathematics. They gave policymakers a godlike power. They handed central banks and finance ministries the levers and buttons of the machine. They promised that nightmares like the Great Depression would never happen again. And do you feel the hubris in that promise? Do you sense the danger in believing that millions of human souls can be predicted with 24 equations? They unleashed an idea more powerful than an atomic bomb, the idea that the future could be controlled. But they forgot one fundamental thing about the machine they were trying to model. The machine is made of us, and we never, ever follow the script.
So, what did this machine look like? In the imagination of these first engineers, the economy was a hydraulic system. It was a vast, complex network of pipes where money, goods, and labor flowed like water. Jan Tinbergen's work, essentially, was the first blueprint of this plumbing. His 24-equation model was an attempt to map every joint and valve. Turn this valve, example government spending, and the flow, employment, increases over there. Close that valve, interest rates, and the pressure, inflation, drops. It was a beautiful vision, and more importantly, it was actionable. This is the pattern revealed. The first Nobel Prize permanently changed the nature of politics. Before Tinbergen and Frisch, economic decisions were moral decisions. You raised taxes because you believed the rich should pay more, or you cut spending because you believed in self-reliance. They were arguments about values. After Tinbergen and Frisch, they became technical decisions. A politician could now stand before the nation and say, "Do not be angry with me for running a deficit. The Nobel-winning model shows this policy will create 150,000 jobs." Do you see? The power of it was seductive. It removed moral accountability from leaders and replaced it with scientific necessity. The econometric models became the great shield of the technocrat. They were the rationale that allowed central banks and governments to intervene in every aspect of your life, all in the name of stability. These models reigned supreme during the 25-year golden age after World War II. Western economies grew, unemployment was low. It seemed the engineers had won. The machine was tamed. But there was a crack, a fatal flaw in their design. The models of Tinbergen and Frisch had one implicit, fatally naive assumption. They assumed the cogs in the machine, you and me, were idiots. They assumed we would never change our behavior, no matter what the government did. Their models treated human beings as physical constants, like gravity or the boiling point of water. They believed you would always spend the same way, save the same way, and demand wage increases the same way, no matter what was happening. For a short time, they were right. But people learn, and we learn viciously. Take the Phillips curve, a central idea in these models that showed a stable trade-off. If the government accepted a little more inflation by opening the money valve, they could buy less unemployment. It was every politician's dream lever. So, throughout the 1960s, they pulled that lever. And then, disaster. In the 1970s, the machine spectacularly exploded. The world woke up to a monster that the models of Tinbergen and Frisch said could not exist: stagflation. This was the economic apocalypse scenario: high inflation and high unemployment at the same time. The water was boiling and freezing simultaneously. The valves didn't work. The levers were broken. What happened? Robert Lucas, who would later win his own Nobel in 1995 for pointing this out, exposed the truth. The problem, he said, is that people are not idiots. When the government kept pulling the inflation lever to try and boost jobs, the people noticed. The unions noticed. You noticed. You began to expect inflation. And the moment you expect 5% inflation next year, what do? You demand a 7% raise now. Businesses expecting higher costs raise their prices now. And boom, the entire Phillips curve collapsed. The government's attempt to buy jobs now only created pure inflation, while unemployment went wherever it wanted to. The hubris of the engineers was exposed. They had forgotten the ghost in the machine, human psychology. They had drawn a map of a river, but they forgot the river had a will of its own. This is the terrifying truth the first Nobel Prize inadvertently revealed. We built our entire global economic system on a set of tools, econometrics, designed by people who believed they could predict you. And its first catastrophic failure was its inability to predict the most basic thing of all: that you would not sit still and be managed. The collapse of these models in the 1970s created a righteous anger, a sense of betrayal. The experts were wrong. The engineers had failed. And it was the ordinary people, the ones who trusted the system, who paid the price with their jobs and their eroded savings. Do you feel that resentment? It still echoes. Because while those first models died, the dream of engineering society never did. It just evolved.
You think that machine went away? You think that after the humiliating failure of 1970s stagflation, the economists humbly went back, tore up their blueprints, and admitted humans are too complex, we cannot be modeled? If you believe that, you haven't been paying attention. The dream of Tinbergen and Frisch did not die. It evolved. It shed its skin, grew larger, more complex, and immeasurably more frightening. Tinbergen's crude 24-equation hydraulic models, they are ancient history. Today, the world's central banks and top hedge funds don't use plumbing. They use quantum physics. They use dynamic stochastic general equilibrium, DSGE models, so complex that their own creators don't fully understand their inner workings. They replaced 24 equations with 24,000 lines of code. And the engineers? They are still here. They just changed their names. They are the quants on Wall Street, the staff economists at the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, ECB, and the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and they are still pulling the levers. Consider this. When you hear the Fed chair say, we need to cool the labor market to fight inflation, Do you understand what they're saying? They are not talking about numbers. They're talking about you. Cooling the labor market is a cold, bloodless, technocratic term for a deliberate action, making business so expensive by raising interest rates that companies stop hiring and start firing people. They're saying that their model shows that for the machine to run smoothly again, a certain number of you must lose your jobs. You are not a person with a mortgage and children. You are wage stickiness that needs to be corrected. You see? The original hubris of 1969 is perfectly intact. It's just shrouded in more complex language. That righteous anger you feel when you realize you are just a sacrificial pawn in their model is completely justified. And then, the machine exploded. Again. Throughout the 2000s, the new generation of engineers, the Wall Street wizards armed with other Nobel-winning models, like the Black-Scholes option pricing model, built the most complex machine ever. They took millions of subprime mortgages, the fragile promises of the most vulnerable people, and used high-level math to bundle them into AAA-rated securities that were safe as gold. Their model said this was safe. Their model said the risk of all homeowners across America defaulting at the same time was near zero. The models were wrong. They were catastrophically wrong. They had forgotten what Keynes had warned about all along: animal spirits. They had forgotten psychology. They had forgotten that when panic hits, people don't behave according to a normal distribution curve. They behave like a herd trapped in a burning theater. They stampede for the single exit. When the bubble burst, it didn't just explode the banks. It exploded the very faith in the engineers. And today, the dream of Tinbergen and Frisch has found its new perfect home: big data and artificial intelligence. Now, the temptation is even greater. The old models failed because we didn't have enough data, they tell themselves. But now, we have everything. They have your clicks, your search history, your GPS location, your heart rate from your smartwatch. They know what you buy, who you talk to, and what you fear. The engineer's dream has become the surveillance dream. If Tinbergen wanted to model a nation, Silicon Valley and today's central banks want to model you. They are building predictive models of consumer behavior, social credit scoring models, models to predict political unrest. They are creating central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, that could, hypothetically, give them the power to turn off or turn on your spending at the flick of a switch. This is the true legacy of 1969. Not stability, but a relentless, escalating arms race between the managers and the managed. The sense of fatalism you feel is real. You are no longer a cog in a simple 24-equation machine. You are a data point in a trillion-parameter AI model that no single human understands, but which is nonetheless deciding if you get the loan, the job interview, or the apartment. The machine of Tinbergen and Frisch has escaped the lab, and now it is everywhere.
The story of the Nobel Prize in economics did not begin with greed. Ironically, it began with its precise opposite. Jarn Tinbergen was a devout socialist, a moralist. Ragnar Frisch, in his lesser-known writings, expressed a deep contempt for inequality and the power of money. They are not the villains of your story, they are its tragic optimists. They truly believed that science, mathematics, and pure reason could liberate humanity from the burden of its own history, from the brutal cycle of boom and bust, of obscene wealth and desperate poverty. They saw the suffering of the Great Depression and they vowed never again. They wanted to build a better world. To do that, they believed they had to build a perfect machine. But this is the eternal paradox, the philosophical question the very first Nobel Prize
accidentally posed. In order to build a world that is perfectly safe and stable, must you eliminate the very things that make life worth living? The chaos, the surprise, the irrationality, the free will. The machine they envisioned required predictable parts, and we, humans, are gloriously unpredictable parts. We love, we hate, we panic, we dream, we rebel. We are the animal spirits that cannot be reduced to an equation. For 50 years, the history of the Riksbank Prize has been the history of this war. The engineers' relentless attempt to perfect the machine on one side, and the messy, chaotic, stubborn resistance of the human spirit. Prizes have been given to men who added more complex gears to the machine, like the financial pioneers. And prizes have been given to men who warned the machine was ignoring the ghost inside, like Kahneman, Thaler, and Schiller. It has celebrated both the arsonists and the firefighters. And where are we now? That feeling of being watched, managed, and rendered into a data point that you feel every day, that is not a bug in the system. That is the system working as designed. It is the dream of Tinbergen and Frisch finally reaching its logical apex, powered by a technology they never could have imagined. Today's AI algorithms not just predict your behavior, they actively nudge you, shaping your decisions, steering you in directions that are profitable for the machine. They create filter bubbles and financial panics at the speed of light. The machine has become automated, and it is learning. So the next time you hear a central banker talk about macro-prudential stability or a tech giant talk about behavioral prediction, remember two earnest physicists from Norway and the Netherlands. Remember that they were given the planet's most prestigious award for beginning a project to engineer uncertainty out of human existence. And ask yourself this question. In the relentless quest to make the world predictable, are we building one we no longer recognize? A world where all the sharp edges, all the chaos, and all the wild beauty of being human have finally been modeled into oblivion. The Nobel Prize in Economics was never really about money. It was always about power, the power of an idea. And the most terrifying question of all is whether that idea now even needs us anymore.